Welcome to the Self-Performance Strategies podcast. Unlocking the secrets of self-performance so you can improve mentally, emotionally, and physically. The goal of this podcast is to help you create more freedom of time, money, and purpose. My name is Stephen, and I am your host. I believe there is always an easier way, and I am here to help you find it. Let's jump in to the SPS podcast. Hello, and welcome to the 11th episode of the SPS podcast of the Self-Performance Strategies podcast. In this episode, we're going to be talking about a very important concept that is killing your success, and that is open loops. Yes, open loops are killing your success. But what is an open loop? Well, before I jump in to explain what an open loop is, I want to frame this conversation, like I always do, with a quote from the gentleman that really introduced this idea of open loops to the productivity and performance industry, and that is David Allen. He said, anything that does not belong where it is an open loop pulling your attention. Now, what I think David Allen is saying here is anything that isn't in the right place mentally, emotionally, physically, whether it's an open project, whether it's a relationship that needs fixed, whatever that is, if you have something that is not in the right place in your life, it's going to pull your attention away from the now. It's going to pull your attention away from what you're trying to do in the moment. And that's an important idea to remember when we're talking about this open loop process and what an open loop is and how we can understand how closing loops can help us with our productivity and performance. But before we jump into the tactical side of the podcast, before we get into how do you use this in your life, let's actually dive in deeper around the idea of open loops and what it actually is. What is an open loop? And there was I think, Russian psychologist and psychiatrist called Bluma Zygarnik, and I apologize if I got that name wrong. She first discovered the open loop process. She discovered that what it's actually called the Zygarnik effect, an open loop. It's a tendency of our brain to remember and focus on incomplete tasks more than it does on complete tasks. There was another study done years later that took this open loop and closed loop idea to the next level. An experiment with waitstaff in a restaurant. And while they were serving and had a table open, maybe 5 or 6 people eating, most waitstaff can remember every detail, the order, what's going on, maybe even names of the people who were eating. But 30 minutes after that table had left and they'd gone home and the person moved on to another table, when they were asked to remember what they'd done half an hour or an hour earlier, what tables they'd helped, they couldn't really remember anything about them. And this is this sort of idea that our brains are very good at remembering open loops when they're open, but as soon as we close them off, the brain does something where it just pushes the information out of our brain. So as soon as we close the loop, it's like us closing a tab on our computer. The energy is not being used by it anymore, and that closed loop information just disappears. But if we leave the tab open in our brain, that open loop is taking energy from us. Our brain is trying to remember that open loop. So it's open on our mind, and it's keeping a part of our subconscious locked in thinking about that information. Dave Allen, the gentleman who I mentioned at the start of the podcast, took this information further and applied the concept to productivity. And in his best-selling book, Getting Things Done, Allen explains there's a direct link between our ability to switch off and relax and our productivity. Makes sense after hearing that example about the waiters. The basic message is that you'll never reach your creative potential and you'll be in danger of burnout unless you allow yourself to access proper rest by closing loops. And this is a very important concept to understand for your own performance, for your own productivity, and for your own life, because we need to close off loops, because if we're not closing off loops, we're killing our success in life. Open loops are killing our success. This is a problem 99% of business owners and leaders struggle with. To further explain what an open loop is, it's anything that's pulling your attention and stopping you from reaching states of flow, basically. We want to get into states of flow and be able to do deep work. So I'm taking this to an even deeper level. They're also the list that appears in your mind as you drift off to sleep, or as you're driving somewhere, or you're in your shower, you start getting all these like thoughts about, oh my God, I've got all this to do. And you never close the loop off. So your subconscious, as I mentioned, likes to think about it. Your subconscious is like, hey, you've still got this open loop. You've told me to remember it. Do you want me to bring it to the front of your brain right now so you can think about it while you're driving or while you're walking somewhere? Your subconscious will do that because you've never actually closed off that loop. So if you're constantly thinking about a bunch of things in your life, it's because you haven't closed them off. Open loops can include bills not paid, money owed, books unread, taxes not done, projects started and left on a shelf, emails not responded to, invitations not answered, boxes left in rooms for years, untidy house, untidy kitchen, untidy car, just anything at all that is an open loop. Unresolved relationship issues, open loops. These are all open loops. Anything that you have left unclosed and undone in your life, that's what they're destroying your success. All that stuff in your mind. And we all do this. We all fall for this because every single day of our lives, we are opening new loops. And the idea is as you open new loops each day, you should be closing loops off from the previous day or the previous month or even sometimes the previous decade of your life. You need to close those loops. You need to free your mind. You consider all your loops important. You do. When you don't close them, you're telling your brain, this is important to me. Going back to the tab on your computer, you're devoting memory to those open loops. It's draining your CPU. It's draining your energy. But doing this can make you feel paralyzed and frustrated. I've experienced that in my own life. You have too many tasks on to tackle, so you tackle none, so you start procrastinating. That's what open loops do to you. It sucks. I've been there as a business owner, as a leader in the corporate environment years ago, as just in general in life, just having so much on and not knowing where to start and having so many open loops, and you just end up not doing anything. But when you actually start closing them, and you start with the low-hanging fruit first, that might be tidying your room, doing your washing your car, paying a bill, doing things that you can do quickly in a 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 minute time period, all of a sudden it starts to build that confidence. And then once you start doing that, you actually start taking on the responsibility of closing some bigger loops, maybe even having a difficult conversation with somebody in your life around a relationship. That's an open loop. But because you build the open loop closing muscle, if that makes sense, you're closing these loops and you're building that muscle, you'll start moving towards the bigger things in your life. And because of that, you'll ultimately get to a point where you can quite happily sit down each day and assess that the only open loops that you have in your life are current projects that you're working on within a 90 or 180 day period. And that's where you want to get to. That's where you want to get to in your life. You don't want to be sitting down and thinking about, oh, I have that relationship with that person, from 5 years ago, and I'm still thinking about, oh, I haven't done my taxes for 4 years. If you've got things that are outside a couple of months open loops, you need to go and fix them. If you've got things, actually, I would argue, if you've got things that are outside, a couple of weeks that you've left open, you should go and close them. Everything that you have open should be a very short-term loop that you're working towards closing. But how do you close loops? Well, I've developed a very simple 2-step process that I've used in my life, and I show to my clients. I help my clients do this as well when I'm working with them one-on-one. And with this simple 2-step process, you can close about 99% of your loops pretty quickly. First, create an open loop list. Go and get your journal, go and put on some nice music, get yourself a cup of coffee, and write out a list of open loops. Set a timer for 30 minutes and brain dump every open loop that you have. Anything that is not complete, from projects to old relationships, get it down on a piece of paper. Now, once that 30 minutes is up and you've got all your open loops out on a piece of paper, you want to go through and do, drop, delegate that whole list. Okay, that's do, drop, delegate, the 3 Ds. You're going to do some of them, you're going to drop most of them, and you're going to delegate some of them. Now, if you've done this first part right, and this happens to me every time I do an open loop list, you'll probably laugh at the amount of bullshit on your mind. You'll laugh at the amount of dumb shit that you've been thinking about. You'll laugh at the amount of little 5-minute jobs that you have around your house or in your life that you're like, well, why haven't I just done that? And that's the point. Now, also, when you have that list, you'll all probably see that there's about 80% of that list you could probably drop. There's probably about 80% of mental load that you have in your mind that are open loops that you can just put a line through and be like, I'm not going to think about this anymore. But because you're doing that on a piece of paper, you're telling your subconscious, hey, I'm closing this. And your subconscious will be like, okay, I'm going to click X on that tab. We're done here. The following 20% is either do or delegate. Now, if you're not an executive or an entrepreneur or a leader who has a team of people below them, you'll probably be doing a lot of this yourself. If you have virtual assistants, if you have a team of people, start looking at the things that you can delegate off. But there will always be a little bit that we have to do ourselves. There always will be. And that's the little 5-minute, 10-minute, 30-minute stuff that we can just get done. But the other part of it is the relationships. If we have unresolved relationships, we can't delegate that, but we can drop it. If you're holding a grudge, or if you have some type of unresolved issue with somebody in your family or somebody in your life, you have two options here. You can write out your pain about that relationship and then just drop it, or you can write them a letter, pick up a phone, and actually speak to that person and try to close that loop. Now, 100% up to you what you want to do. That can be quite tough because it's getting into emotions and relationships. Personally, what I did with a lot of them when I first came across this open loop idea is I actually wrote them all a little letter or had a conversation in a journal, because some of these people are living in different parts of the world. I haven't seen them for decades, but I had a small amount of resentment or some sort of hang up with old friendship. And I just wrote out a little quick letter or a journal entry about it all, and I just let it go. Just let it go. And that worked really well for me, and it removed a lot of weight from those unresolved relationships in my life. It was open loops in relationships in my life. Now, there could be more difficult ones with people who you see more regularly in your life. Totally up to you how you deal with that, but closing off that emotional baggage, so to speak, is a really important part of this open loop process. Now, once you've done that and you've gone through your list, you've closed things off, you need to start doing this monthly. You need to do a monthly audit. Life is crazy. You're constantly opening new loops daily, like I said earlier in the episode. Relationship loops will be harder to close, like I mentioned, but the emotional freedom you will feel once they are is 100% worth it. It really is. So sit down at the end of each month and close loops and see your mental performance improve. It happens. It just works. It is such a great process. Don't let open loops stop you, because they're killing your success right now. I have not met a person who has this 100% under control. I don't have it 100% under control because, like I just said, we're constantly opening new loops. We're constantly starting new relationships, meeting new people, maybe falling out with people in our lives. Things are happening. People grow, people change. So there's lots of things happening. We're always starting new projects. So I don't know anybody who's got this 100% under control. But I do know by making it a part of your monthly process and doing a monthly audit, you will have 80, 90, 95, maybe even higher percent of your open loops under control. If you ever feel overwhelmed and stressed, or if you're feeling overwhelmed and stressed right now and you're listening to this, take time to go and do this exercise right now. As soon as you finish this podcast, go and do this exercise. And you will start feeling more focused and mentally clear as soon as you go through the exercise and start closing loops and dropping shit, delegating stuff, and just really closing a lot of those tabs on your CPU and your brain. Allowing your hard drive and your RAM in your mind to, really start focusing on the now and focusing on what is important to you. So the advice from this podcast, from the 11th episode of the SPS podcast, is go close as many loops as you can so you can open up success. Thanks very much for joining me for this episode of the SPS podcast. I hope you got a lot out of it. I hope you can go and close all the loops you have so you can flow towards success. If you want to reach out to me, you can hit me up on my socials, on Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok, at Steve Timoney. It's SteveTimoney. Or you can slide on over to my main website, which is Stephen Timoney, StephenTimoney.com, and you can just check out everything that I do. It's me.com. But yeah, thanks very much for joining me in this episode. Hopefully we'll speak to you. Well, I nearly got that one out. Hopefully we'll speak to you in the next episode, and go and smash it. Make it a good one.